So, good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's Top Talk guest webinar session. Hi, Clay. I heard you in the wings there. How you doing?
Good. How are you, Jay?
I'm very good, mate, and I'm really pleased to have you with us. So, really grateful as well. Really excited when
Yeah.
you got in touch.
Thanks for having me. This is awesome.
You know, our friends at Tether Tools have put us together, but when they said, "Oh, Clay was interested," I jumped at the chance. I thought it was excellent. So, I've had a little sneaky peek of what we're in store for tonight, but really excited to talk about that. So, Clay, obviously, like I said, we have mutual friends with Tether Tools, and they've sponsored tonight's presentation for us, so we can give it to everybody for free. I don't know, from what I understand, international globe-trotting editorial / fashion photographer, is that the best way to sum you up?
Yeah, that'll work. Something like that.
Yeah, it's good. I like it. You know, I'm quite jealous. Quite jealous. So, guys, I'm going to share. Clay is very keen for you to interact with him. So, I'll be sharing all your links. They're on the screen at the moment, but you'll get them via the chat panel. Clay, I guess to be honest, I know you're going to tell everybody a little bit about yourself before we get started. So, I think it's probably just as easy if I give you the screen, pal, and we'll get the show on the road. How do you think?
Yeah, it sounds great.
Excellent. Okay, mate, it's coming over to you now. And I'll let you know once everybody can see the screen clearly. So, guys, please remember, we do want you to interact with us. So use that question panel, and I'll feed them through to Clay where appropriate. So, like I said, we've got plenty of time allowed at the end. The questions as well. So I've got some nice rock and roll images in front of me. Clay, are we good to go, mate?
We're good to go.
Excellent. So I'm going to go quiet. Clay, it's all yours. And like I said, I'm here with the questions. Well, you just give me a shout if you need anything from me, pal.
Cool, thanks. So I'm going to just kind of start from the beginning. Pretty much my creative career began when I was 16 years old. I started playing music with a group of friends of mine, and it sort of just snowballed into something that was something I couldn't even possibly imagine. We started playing small clubs, small bars, in front of 5 people, which eventually led to playing in front of festivals in front of 20,000 people. It was one of the most rewarding experiences I've ever had being in a band. But I learned a lot about what to do and what not to do in the music business. But during that time, I started really getting involved in the visual arts and graphic design, namely. I would design my own band's flyers. I would design my own band's album artwork, and then I got approached to start doing that for other bands as well as other labels that we had shared mutual tours with and whatnot. And again, it just sort of was a snowball effect where I started doing more and more graphic design gigs for people, for bands and labels. And then I sort of got into the world of photography when I got a request to do original photography. So shooting stock photography basically was something I got a request for. And then to implement that into the graphic design, like album artwork or flyers or whatnot. And so I was doing a lot of MySpace pages as well as a lot of websites. And then I just got a camera, and right around that same time, the band ended. I compare the music business as sort of running on a treadmill. You keep running, you just kind of never get anywhere. So when I transitioned into the world of photography and the music business, from the music business into the photography business, everything sort of came very easily for me. The business side of everything sort of exploded. It went from me doing all this album artwork and then playing music, of course, into shooting with major clients, and then shooting with other bands, obviously, as you see here, and shooting more editorial work and more fashion. And it just sort of snowballed, the snowball effect. And it's been something that I've been shooting photography for nearly 6 years. So not that long, but it was almost an easy transition going from music to graphic design to photography, and I love it. And I couldn't be happier where my career has sort of taken me and where photography has taken me, which has taken me all over the world, fortunately, and I'm very blessed to be able to do that. Before we dive into this topic of what we're going to talk about, I do want to reiterate what Jay said about the social media sites. You can look me up on Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat. Snapchat at Clay Cook Photo. Facebook.com/ClayCookPhoto. Of course, my blog, I've got a super awesome project that just is actually being released tomorrow on Iraq. So check out my blog and then go to, of course, my website. And then I have an open email where anyone can email me any questions that you guys, if you want to follow up with me, feel free to email me. I'll always respond. So info@claycookphotography.com. Feel free to hit me up. So the topic today is the fabrication of a fashion editorial from plan to post. So I'm going to kind of walk you through what I've learned over these past 6 years of how to basically produce a fashion editorial as a photographer. I think that there's many ways that you can do it, but this is the way that I do it, and this is the way that I've found to be the most successful and the pretty much industry standard. So the number one thing is that you want to plan the shot, not the shoot. And what I mean by that is you want to plan the photograph. So each individual photograph requires its own planning. So don't go into the whole project by thinking, oh, I'm going to do this big thing and sort of improv it all. You need to plan specifically each shot. And that all starts with basically an idea. An idea is everything. You know, as us as artists, we have, you know, everything is based upon our idea. It's about our mind and our eye more than the actual tools and the camera. So it's important to do a lot of research. You know, I tend to look into tear sheets. Tear sheets are a great resource to find some inspiration. So I look into Vogue, Vanity Fair. I look into all sorts of different magazines. I think I have a subscription to like every single magazine out there. And I continually pull these tear sheets out to gain inspiration. I pin them on a wall and I reference these later. Pinterest is a great way. So I love Pinterest. Pinterest is a great way to basically get out there and find some inspiration. Also blogs. Blogs are awesome. Blogs are a great way to sort of research and sort of scour. You know, you could scour the internet and find a lot of ideas from blogs. And then, of course, social media is a great way to find inspiration. And inspiration can come from anywhere. I get asked a lot, like, who's your biggest inspiration? What's your biggest inspiration? Sort of inspiration comes from everywhere and anywhere for me. These are just some ways that I have found to be pretty much the most successful for me to really gain an idea. And so an idea might be just a photograph like this, or an idea might be a photograph like this. And once you have an idea, then you can sort of focus in and hone in what kind of overall mood that you want to go for. And what I mean by mood is basically a concept. First, you need to develop the concept. You need to figure out, you know, where are you going to go? Like, what is this going to look like? You got to determine the style and mood. What's the clothing look like? What's the overall lighting? You know, what's the overall concept? What's the overall mood? You need to nail that down into something that can be defined pretty easily. You're going to have to pin down the page count. So when you're working with a magazine, it's super important that you determine how many pages or how many overall looks and images that you're going to have to deliver, because that's going to play a role into logistics as well as scouting and everything that's about ready to come here. So you got to make sure that you have a clear understanding of what your client needs are. And so this is an example of a mood board that we kind of come up with for a 4-look fashion editorial, or or this particular promotional photo shoot. So, you know, you want to make sure that you have ideas and all these moods are sort of lined out. And this, again, this isn't something that you need to copy. This is something that you're essentially just kind of an overall feeling, an overall mood that you're going for. There is room for improv, of course, and that's the beauty of fashion editorial. So once you have this mood and sort of the overall concept locked down, and you have your how many looks, you need to determine them. You need to come up with a mood board like this, so that then you can send this to a team. So with everything that I do ever, pretty much, I work with a team. So a team is, you're just as good as anybody else. So a team is so important because there's all sorts of facets and variables that go into creating a fashion editorial. And just to kind of remind everyone, if you don't know what a fashion editorial is, editorial is something that is one person's opinion that is in print. So it's a magazine. And then fashion is basically exactly what it is. It's wardrobe. You're essentially just photographing wardrobe for a magazine. And that's what basically fashion editorial is. And then there's a lot of, because it's editorial, there's a lot of creativity that can be accomplished, so or allowed. So I love doing fashion editorial because there's so much creativity, and really the creativity starts with a creative director. A lot of times I'll play creative director, or maybe the stylist will play creative director. There's always somebody that's at the helm, sort of pushing the photo shoot in a certain direction, or making sure that all the logistics are handled, all the models are on time, everything that's sort of usually either a creative director or producer handles. So a creative director is a super important, and they're making sure that all the photos are looking good, everything's in the sort of flowing in the direction of where it needs to go. So with a team, I always work with a creative director. Of course, I always work with a model or models. Sometimes I've worked up to 10 models. Some of my favorite shoots have been big groups of models. So it doesn't have to be a single model. It can be multiple models. So, just depends on the concept and depends on the overall mood. So then there's the wardrobe stylist, because you're shooting fashion here. So a wardrobe stylist plays a huge role. And the wardrobe stylist, their job is to essentially pull clothing or collaborate with a designer for the photo shoot itself. What I mean by pull clothing, they literally go shopping and pull clothes off racks to use in the photo shoot. Then there's the hairstylist. So that's pretty standard. You need someone there to make sure that the hair is not crazy and not the flyaways aren't everywhere, because that's a retoucher's nightmare. And then of course there's the makeup artist, and then there is usually a digital tech or a retoucher in post-processing. I use a retoucher. His name is Jordan Hartley. He's out of Canada, and he does awesome work. Or I've worked with digital techs on site. Now, a lot of times my assistants will play digital techs, and basically what a digital tech is someone that's pretty much watching the computer, making sure that the images are in focus, making sure that they're colored. And so when my client or the creative director's client is coming to the tethering station to view the image on a screen, he's making sure that it's pretty close to the final vision, just not retouched. And then of course you have assistants. So a lot of times a creative director, a model, the stylist, the hairstylist, the makeup artist will all have assistants. So you're talking sometimes on a fashion editorial 30 plus people. It's a lot of people, and it's a lot of people to manage, a lot of people to sort of, it can be overwhelming a lot when there's that many people. Here's an example. This is actually one of my smaller shoots that I've done, but you've got a hairstylist, you've got the hairstylist assistant, but what's not seen here is about the 10 people behind that black curtain that are working behind the scenes to flow these models through like on a conveyor belt. So everything I do, again, I work with a team, and teams are so important because that's just going to magnify your imagery, because I'm not a hairstylist and I really don't know what, I know what good hair looks like, but I don't know how to get there. And the same thing with makeup. I don't know how to do makeup, but I know what good makeup looks like. And it's important to trust your team and trust the people that you work with, and make sure you trust their talent. And it's just going to magnify your imagery tenfold. So once you have your team locked in, the next step is basically logistics. It's all behind the scenes. Like it's all working towards this day of shoot. The first thing when you're contracted to shoot a fashion editorial, Once you've determined sort of your concept, your idea, once you've sort of collaborated with your client on that, you've got a team locked in, you need to determine the license. So basically, what's the contract? What's the license that that your client is going to receive? You know, as a commercial photographer, the license can be a very sort of gray area for a lot of photographers. It can be a very confusing area, but it's super important that you are knowledgeable in that world. Otherwise, you will be taken advantage of as a photographer. So you got to make sure you know what you're talking about when it comes to licensing your photographs. So normally, when I work with an editorial client, such as a magazine, I am giving them the license to use, one-time license to use, or unlimited licensing to use that image in just their magazine, or just their blog, or just their website. It's a very specific license that is occasionally it is determined through negotiation. So I negotiate the fee, I negotiate terms of the license, I negotiate all that stuff, and that all leads up to me quoting the project. How many days is this thing going to take? How many images is it? Am I going to have to pay for the team? Am I going to have to hire the team, or is the client going to do that? Is it a client provision? Are they going to provide that? So all that comes into play before you quote the project, and it can be very overwhelming. But once you've quoted the project, and if they've agreed to the project and agreed to the price that you've set in the terms, then you need to come up with a call time. And a lot of times that's a collaborative effort between you and the creative director, you and the stylist, or you and the client. But you got to collaborate, and you got to inform the rest of your team of when this photo shoot's going to take place. What's the parking like? What's load-in? Are there going to be craft services? Is food going to be provided? All that stuff needs to be, you got to make sure you line it out on what I like to call a call sheet. So something that's very clear, very precise, and so that way you're avoiding all this headache of people calling you, people texting you, trying to figure out where do they enter the studio, where they enter the location, all that stuff logistically wise. It's super smart to set a clear call sheet and send out and collaborate and inform all your team that where to go and how to get there, where to set up, etc. So this is an example of an estimate that I've built in the past for a client. Some of these numbers might be overwhelming to you, but you have to understand that this was a huge project, a huge client. This was actually not for a magazine, but would be published in a magazine. So this was more of a commercial photo shoot. And you'll see that we've lined out these fees. We've lined out the license, collateral and publicity use up to 7 images for 2 years from first use. The fees include a combined creative licensing fee. So that's what the licensing fee and a creative fee would cost for me to basically get out the door and then to have the ability to use these images. And then, of course, there's scout days. There's pre-production days. Under expenses, we've lined out first assistants, second assistants, third assistants, which I've waived because I have interns that can play third assistant, even second assistant. I've got 2 digital tech shoot days and 2 digital tech travel days. 3 production assistants, so basically PAs. Those are 3 assistant days. So PAs are the guys that get coffee, or they just make sure that all these logistics are handled. So if you're working with a team, they just make sure that everybody's comfortable, everybody is settled in and getting their work done. And of course, we have hair and makeup stylists, we have wardrobe stylists, we have wardrobe stylist assistants, which I've waived. Then we have wardrobe, which is to be determined. So if they have to buy the wardrobe, that's definitely an expense you want to include. Styling expenses, which includes meals, parking, shipping, kit fees, miscellaneous. And then, of course, we have equipment rental. Here we have 2 production RV days. So let's say you're on location. You're in the middle of a field. Where is hair and makeup going to take place? Where are these models going to change? So a lot of times we have to rent production RVs or tents, or we have to have a place where these models can go to change and get their hair and makeup. And it's got to be a very climate controlled place, because makeup and hair and all this stuff requires, not them sweating, or it also requires power. All that stuff, it plays a role. So a production RV can be super handy. And then, of course, lodging, because the shoot would take place over 2 shoot days. And then finally, we have mileage, parking, per diems, production supplies, miscellaneous, and then retouching and post-processing, 7 selects with one round of revision. So you can see the total here. It is a massive project. It's a massive bid we put in. So that's an example of sort of an estimate that I do when I'm quoting a client for a fashion project. So once you've sort of agreed on these terms, and once a client has maybe agreed to this project, the first thing you got to do is scout. You've got to figure out where you're shooting, what you're doing, based upon the mood and the concept. And so scouting to me is a very vital aspect of shooting fashion. I'll spend usually a full day just cruising around an area, just figuring out where the sun is, and all this stuff goes hand in hand with what the final image will look like. So the first thing you need to do is plan composition. Again, we're planning each photograph. So if there's 7 photographs that are going to be the final deliverable, then you need to plan 7 total sets. Plan composition. I always look for structure. I look for good lines. I look for good horizontal, vertical lines, good diagonal lines. And then I also try to predict light, and I also try to predict the sun with everything I do, because you never know what's going to happen. There might be variables of, suddenly this model is late, and then you have to scrap that first shot and put that on the back end. So it's good to have and know where your sun's going to be, because it leaves a little bit room for improv. It leaves a lot of room for improv if you know exactly where your sun's going to be or where the light's going to be. So when I'm scouting, I'm looking where the sun is, I'm predicting the sun, I'm making sure that I have backup plans or backup sets in case something goes awry. So you want to predict the light and sun, you want to find a good background. Finding a background is crucial. You want to make sure that when you're shooting, especially for a magazine, that you think about copy, you think about writing, you think about graphics, visual graphics, and how they're going to throw text on this as well. So a background is a crucial aspect. And then, of course, you want to have staging room for your equipment. This could be a production RV. This could be, a corner of a secure room. This could be a conference room. This could be anything. You want to make sure you have staging room for both your models, your hair, your makeup, your creative director, all your assistants, your wardrobe stylists, all that stuff. Staging room is huge, and that could be, like I said, a production RV, a tent, anything that's secure where people can put their stuff. So this is an example of a cool box I saw that was just sitting there. It's something that I found in the background that was interesting. I liked all the I liked all the horizontal lines in this sort of random environment, and that turned into this shot. So I just basically saw just a prop and used it as a foundation for all these cool lines. Then I saw that there was these power lines, which created these nice diagonal lines in the frame. So this is an example of where I was predicting light and just finding a cool background. Same thing with here on the left, where I saw these teacups, or on the right where I saw this nice flower bed. That eventually turned into this shot with the teacups, and then this shot with the flower bed. And so it was about predicting light. It was about knowing your location really, really well. It is a huge aspect to shooting fashion. Now, once you've had time to do all this back-end work, do all the logistics, now the time is to actually do the photo shoot. And the most important aspect for me as a photographer is to spend the proper amount of time pre-lighting. We spend hours and hours just pre-lighting, pre-staging every little shoot we do. And if you don't have an assistant that can help you out with this, then a lot of times you could use a makeup artist, you can use a hairstylist, use a creative director, use anybody that will just stand in to help you pre-light or help you get composition, or anybody that will help out. Now, worst case scenario, if you're doing sort of this fashion work by yourself, you can use yourself. I've used a remote trigger before, set it up on a tripod, and photographed myself under this lighting scenario. So, but lighting and pre-lighting is a huge thing. You want to meet and greet first. So when you go into a photo shoot, you want to make sure you meet everybody before you load, because no one wants to meet and greet and hug a sweaty mess. So you want to make sure that you go into the location or you go into the photo shoot and talk to everyone first, make sure everybody's comfortable, and then you load in. Or you load in the day before, or you load in hours before anyone gets there. Again, you want to make sure that you pre-stage and you pre-light so that when these models walk onto your set ready to go, you're ready to go. You are pre-lit, you're pre-staged, you know how the composition is going to look, and so that way you can really eliminate a lot of time by making sure that all your lighting is set up, or your composition is set. So it removes a lot of that improv sort of time, because again, if you're shooting multiple looks, time is everything, and you got to make sure that you're set up ready to go, so that on average you only need to shoot between, I would say, 2 to 5 minutes per model. I don't spend that much time with each model. You want to make sure that you consolidate. So as you move on and as you move forward throughout the photo shoot, you want to make sure that all your gear is consolidated, it's organized so people aren't tripping on cables, all your cables are gaffed down, you're super organized, and of course you're very focused. It's a huge thing to do something like this, a fashion editorial. So you got to make sure that you're focused on what you're doing. You're not distracted. All that stuff plays a huge role into the final result. Before I move forward in the next section, Jay, do I have any questions out there? Happy to answer a couple of questions while
we do. I was about to chip in actually, but what I was waiting to see is that some of the questions are really relevant, but I wasn't sure if you were going to cover the answers, but I think we'll just answer them. And if there's anything here that you're going to cover in the presentation, just say we're about to cover that.
Okay.
They're not in any particular order, Clay, but I thought this was interesting, and it came in quite early because obviously, we've got the insight now. It's not often we get to see the insight of somebody who's in the position that you are to do these big shoots. So when you were starting out, so I'm going to take you right back to the beginning, what's the best advice you can give somebody for, even if it's portfolio building, is it the case of having to try and do, I know on the cheap obviously, but build as best the portfolio as you can to get it out there? When you got going, what was the best approach that you took, do you think?
Yeah, so I built basically portrait series. Like I did big creative series of photographs. So my first series was a series I did on Bond girls. So I basically created this whole series surrounding the Bond girls. So I created my own Bond girl. I had a background story on them, and then we went to locations and we photographed them, and I released this massive series, and it just sort of made a splash in the community here in Louisville, Kentucky. So I think that wherever you are in the world, in order to build your portfolio, I think you just need to be as creative as possible, because I do believe that creativity leads to clients. So the more creative you are, the more likely you'll get higher caliber clientele. So when you're first starting out, I always recommend just be as creative as possible, go completely outside your comfort zone, and just keep going, just never give up, and just keep pushing as hard as you can to be creative.
And so moving that step forward then, so you started doing, your creative, your portfolio shoots to build up. So what's the sort of getting started with, trying to actually get paid work from it? Any quick, not quick tips, but your best advice for that? I mean, I know there's probably millions, but, when you're getting started and you need to start making some money or want to start making some money, what?
Yeah, I think when you first start, you can't really go into it wanting money, because I would say that for the first couple of years as a photographer, you can't expect to be paid that much money. only when you really meet people, you know, like it comes to me, like when it comes to clients and comes to business, you know, I always say that I'm not in the photography business, I'm in the relationship business. And that's something I've learned back in the music days, and it's gone such a long way just by building relationships and talking to people rather than like you know, just doing things that out of the box. I think what's most important is building relationships if you really want to start getting paid, and then backing that up with a super creative product. So the biggest thing, the best advice I can give people that are just starting out is to just get out of your house, you know, get out there, talk to people, meet other photographers, meet as many people as you can, and then again back it up with a very creative product, and that's the way you're going to start making some real progress in business.
So best way to promote and advertise yourself is, you know, is there a big part of that being online today?
Yeah, I think that today, and more as we go, it's important that we as photographers basically try to monetize everything we do. So yeah, your online presence is a big thing. The best way to promote yourself is going to be online because that's the biggest audience that you'll have, likely. It's the biggest voice you could have. So social media plays a huge role, making sure that you have I've always kind of stood by the fake it till you make it thing. So, you know, put out there that you're doing cool things, that you're rocking it, you're working hard, and people will notice. And so for me, it always worked best with social media, and it's a huge thing because I have been hired by clients because of the fact that I do have an awesome audience, because I do have those great numbers on the social media front. So it does play a role in today's day and age. So yeah.
And I guess, and you'll tell me if I'm different, because obviously I'm, you know, working with, you know, and doing these things with other photographers, you've got to, you know, that there is legwork involved, isn't there? Get yourself there, you know, don't be afraid, you know, to email, to even knock the door, or, you know, get your work seen by the relevant people. It doesn't just, you know, it's not going to just fall on your lap. It is, you know, footwork still involved, mate, yeah?
Oh yeah. I'm constantly I would say I'm almost at my computer or at my laptop more than I'm actually doing photo shoots, because for me, you know, a lot of that back-end business work is just following up with people that you meet. It's negotiating, it's talking to people. I spend hours and hours and hours just emailing people, setting up newsletters, marketing myself through various ways, and yeah, it requires a hustle. Most of the biggest jobs I've ever gotten were because either A, I knew people, or B, I just simply sent an email and I was put into their photographer catalog, and then I was approached soon after that. So yeah, it just requires a hustle, and it's a lot of work, but depends on how much and how bad you want it, you know.
Sure, absolutely, brilliant. Somebody mentioned, Kevin mentioned that he was fortunate enough to do a small job for Warner Brothers. He didn't say what it was, but would you use something like that to help leverage? You know, do you talk about the bigger jobs when you're promoting yourself? Do you think those sort of things help leverage? He said it wasn't the biggest job in the world, but it was a good one, and obviously it's a brand that everybody's aware of. So, you know, you use these things, right? I presume you do.
Yeah, absolutely. It comes back to that sort of fake it till you make it professional perception. You know, like even if it was a small job, if you got paid by Warner Brothers, then they are your client. So you could definitely own that. And I would say that's a great thing. Put that in your client list because people will see that. So if they see that you've been working with bigger clients and they're a big client, then they're more likely to hire you because you have those names and you have their trust marks are what they are, you know, basically, hey, this guy knows what he's doing because he has these other clients he's worked with, so I trust him to get this product for me. So that's a huge thing. It's just building those client lists and building the people that you work with. So yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. Okay, so I've got a few more. These are more about the actual shoots now and the style and everything that we've sort of touched on so far.
Okay.
So I thought this was interesting. I know you've sort of kind of talked a little bit around your process. How important to you is flow? And then then Stephen asked, do you keep the images similar, or in some shoots do you really mix it up?
As far as like composition,
I think the question is kind of in composition, but even in style and lighting, do you sometimes go to different extremes within the actual designated 7 image, job?
I usually have a I usually have a very clear idea of how I'm going to shoot things. Now that doesn't say that I'm taking one shot and then moving on. There is a barrage of images that I do photograph per model or per set, but it's very strategically planned. I usually know and I have a clear idea of what the pose is going to look like, or kind of a rough idea of where I want the model, or an idea of what I want it to look like, and then sort of within that 2 to 5 minute time zone, I work with them, and we're just busting out pose after pose after pose, or I'm switching up. Rarely do I go beyond like 10 minutes working with a model. I think after that it's just sort of overkill, and you're just sort of you're going to have a hard time in post-processing deciding on an image if you just overshoot things. I definitely know that you can overshoot, because that's what I used to do. I used to I would spend like 45 minutes on one look or something like that. This wasn't for a client, but I definitely would do that. But now I know I have such a vision in my head that I have negated that time down to just a short 5 minutes at most with each model or each look. And my clients love that, because we're knocking it out, So yeah, there is a little bit of room for improv, but usually I have a very clear idea of what I'm going to go for.
So I think, even though that was a great answer, and obviously I think I actually probably didn't convey it to you in the best way, Clay. So I think the question, you've talked about style and lighting, and obviously from what we've seen so far, obviously your shoots are very much themed. I think the question was, do you drastically mix the theme up sometimes? So do you go from, the natural lighting on location, but then you go, are there times where the client wants a studio shot with, crazy neons, where it's a complete, distraction?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I think it depends. I think absolutely. Like, it depends on what the client's needs are, or what they're kind of looking for, and the collaborative effort between you and the creative director or the client. I have clients that like throw me, even if it's just one inspiration image, and they're like, we want this to be gelled out in a studio and looking really crazy, and then the next shoot will be all natural, hard light, sunlight. So it just depends on the overall mood. It depends on the idea that you're you collaborate on. So each photo shoot is unique to its own, and I think that's very important, that you don't try to just reiterate something you've already done. You try to do something more extreme, better, and different than what you've done in the past. I think that's a huge thing in fashion. So always try to better yourself and do differently. Now, if it's the same photo shoot, no, I don't switch up lighting at all. If it's the same photo shoot for the same client and the same editorial, I make sure to have each photograph be consistent and sort of work and flow with the previous and the next image, in the magazine. So
brilliant. I heard you mention this earlier, and a question came in about it. You referred to, I think it was probably the wardrobe assistants, sometimes taking the clothes from the shelf, or buying them from the shelf. Do you remember you remember that at the beginning, near the beginning?
Yeah, I do.
So the question that kind of come in, if they're bought like that, is that budgeted for in the quote, or or are you just renting them or borrowing them, or?
Yeah, a lot of times they're just borrowing them, or sometimes they do have to purchase clothing or purchase shoes. So it is an expense that's put in there. So for example, with shoes, you can only do so much with shoes, but as soon as they leave the store and they're put on a model's foot, and then they're, you walk out in the middle of a dirty road, a lot of times you're going to have to buy those shoes. It's just a part of the budget. It's just an expense. So yeah, there is that sort of buffer expense that's usually put into budgets or quotes.
Perfect. I've just scanned what else I've got at the moment, and they're a little bit more generic. So if we want to crack on, I'll hang on to these ones for the question time, pal.
Cool. Yeah, great. We'll get moving on. So once you've basically pre-staged, pre-lit, consolidate, consolidate all your equipment, you're organized. The next most important thing that is on my list is to tether during the photo shoot. I tether every photo shoot. For example, this is a fashion editorial I did in Havana, Cuba, and it's important that I tethered on this photo shoot so my client and the entire team could see what was going on, see what I was photographing. I do tether every single photo shoot. In the studio, it's a lot more of a controlled thing. There's monitors, and then on location, I'm using just basically a MacBook Pro. But what tethering provides is, one, a professional perception. Perception's always been a huge thing for my whole creative career. In the music business, I learned that if you walk into a room looking like a rock star, then people think that you are a rock star. So professional perception is huge in this business. And tethering is a part of that because you have all this equipment, you have all this, people can see the image, and clients love to see that. They love to see the bigger equipment. They love to see you bringing out the big guns. And I always say, I'll always bring all of my equipment on a photo shoot, because if you have all this equipment, then it looks like you're, more of an established photographer. I might only shoot natural light, but I still have all my equipment. And so for a client, that looks really good. So tethering and having that visual for the client is super huge. It does allow you to slow down, shoot less. You're not as frantic. You're not spraying and praying all over the place because tethering, there is a time from once you take the image to when it shows up in your laptop. So it does slow you down, which is a good thing. You're not as chimping as much. You're really focusing on what's in front of you rather than focusing on your tools like your camera. So tethering is a great thing. So it provides a clear vision, so the entire team can see what you're shooting, so that if they need to do wardrobe checks, or they need to do hair and makeup checks, or they see a pin that's popping off one of the model's back, then they can fix that, and the whole team can see that on a big computer or a big monitor rather than your 3-inch LCD screen on the back of the camera. So they're viewing this on a big screen, so tethering is great for that. It also allows you to evaluate composition. So usually I'll shoot roughly between, I would say, 5 to 10 shots, and then I'll pause, and then I'll look at my monitor and make sure that sort of in the composition of where I am is where I want to go. So again, it slows you down, you shoot less, you pause, you evaluate the composition, and then you change it up and you do it again. And this is all within a 5-minute span. So it's a very quick thing, but the results are just so much better. And then also, finally, it allows your client to proof on site. So proofing is a big part of what we do. So proofing, the client can proof each individual image, go through, flag their favorites, and then it eliminates any sort of back-end work as far as proofing. And so you can see here my client is viewing the results on the TV screen, and occasionally they'll jump in, fix something, and it'll jump back out. I fire a couple images, and then we nailed it, and we can move on to the next model or the next look. So in post-processing, once I've done the photo shoot, proofing is a huge part. I send my clients proofing galleries such as this through my website, where they can just choose images, and they're like, I like this one, I like this one, and I like this one. It's an important part of the process, and you don't want to deliver too many images. You want to make sure you cull to the best shots. I usually provide between 5 to 10 frames at most per look. So you're not giving the client the entire take, you're giving them the best shots. You want to make sure that you check focus, because your client will always choose the shot that's out of focus, just like standard. They always will. So you want to make sure you check your focus on all the shots and make sure that they're sharp or they look good if they are out of focus. Provide a minimal selection. Again, this comes back to culling down to the best. You want to provide as least selections as possible to your client, because they'll always choose the one that you usually don't want if that's the case. So provide a minimal selection because it's going to save time. It's just going to be way easier for your client. And then finally, ask for editing notes during the proofing process. You want to make sure that everything is clear. They know that that your retoucher knows that this piece of clothing needs to be fixed, these flyaways need to be removed. All that stuff is clear and lined out. So editing notes is a big aspect during the proofing process. And then next up is the actual post-processing. I tether and I color grade using Capture 110. Capture 110 is incredible software that I use on-site and then in the post-process. So how this works is usually I'll get the proofs, the selections back from my client, and then I will send those raw images off to, from Capture One off to my retoucher, Jordan, and then he will send them back to me, and then he goes and he retouches and composites in Adobe Photoshop. And then once I get them back from Jordan, then I'll go back into Capture 110 and I'll color grade those images and sharpen them and put my final touch on them. So the next step after that post-process happens is delivery, is delivering the images. I normally have a 2-week turnaround on the post-processing, so it depends on sort of your deadline. You want to make sure that you line out a clear deadline when you're setting up photo shoots. So once I get the photo shoot done, then that entire process usually requires about 2 weeks, occasionally even less if we're on a strict deadline. I provide 1 round of revisions. Revisions beyond 1 round is usually a billable item. So revisions could be anything that the client needs that they forgot or didn't include in the edited notes when they're seeing the final image. It does happen occasionally. I export via JPG, and if the client requests, I export via TIFF. If they're doing a billboard or they're doing something that requires a big image, big resolution, then I will provide the TIFF files. I provide 1 final download link via my server, so I have a Synology server that's all set up, and once the images are complete, I throw them all onto my server. I provide a download link. Client downloads them, and then I send an invoice, and I follow up with an invoice on the email with the download link. And then hopefully within 30 to 60 days, I'm getting paid. So that's pretty much the entire process from start to finish. Jay, if you want to hop in and I can answer, we can do a quick Q&A now. So.
Absolutely, Paolo, brilliant, and what a fantastic. I know it's what we've covered in 40 minutes is a real insight, but it's a real insight into the real world, and I don't think we've ever been able to share the fashion editorial in such a in an in-depth way, even in the short time that we've been on today. So brilliant, mate. Yeah, I've got a load of questions for you. Again, they're not in any particular order, so okay. I'll ask them as we go down. I think you kind of already answered this first one, and it came in quite early, but I've hung on to it in case we just need to reiterate it. Obviously, you talked about your mood boards, and obviously you're planning in advance, and obviously you're talking in conjunction with, your client. So how much of the story is fleshed out in advance? I'm guessing pretty much most of it, right?
Yeah, pretty much everything is determined before we get on site. It's all a pre-production. I would say that I spend more time in pre-production than the actual photo shoot. So, and that's all the negotiation, that's determining moods, developing mood boards, call sheets, logistics, all that stuff is usually handled over a period of days, while the photo shoot might only actually be 8 hours. So most of it is in the pre-production. But yes, all that is handled way up front.
So this was quite interesting because obviously we talked today about you talked a lot about styling and themes, but one of the questions that came in, and I hung on to it specifically. I have all of the questions. Obviously, I haven't got rid of any of the questions unless they were repeats of each other. So,
Mhm.
I'm not taking the questions out. But this one was, how do you create a narrative? Is it more about style and theme and location? Is there a narrative, or is that something that's discussed, again with the client?
Yeah, usually there is. You know, or if there's not, then there's sort of a narrative in my mind that I kind of personally like to tell. I think we're visual storytellers as photographers. It's important to, when you're determining the, kind of the idea, uh, visual storytelling is huge. So if there isn't really a narrative that's discussed between you and your client or you and the creative director, then I think it's important to have one in your mind. When you're scouting, you're sort of developing this story of the model or developing the story with the clothing. Anything sort of helps, with the final results as far as storytelling goes. I love telling stories. I think that's a crucial thing when it comes to being a photographer. So it is a huge aspect of building a fashion editorial. Sometimes it's discussed, sometimes it's just in my head, but yes, usually I have a pretty clear idea of the narrative or the sort of the story I want to tell.
Brilliant. I thought this was quite an interesting question, actually. So you're talking about when you were working with the models. Obviously, it's a job where we're working with a lot of models. Do you expect them to have like a repertoire of poses of their own, or do you take full control over the pose in the image yourself?
That's a good question. It depends on the model. If I feel like the model has been established and she knows what she's doing, and usually I can tell pretty upfront the experience of the model. And a lot of times it has to do with their age too, experience obviously. So, when I work with younger models, I have a pretty clear idea of what the pose is going to look like, and I sort of mold them like clay a little bit. But when I work with an experienced model, I kind of put them in a position and just let them go. And so it does vary, but it's usually something that I kind of judge beforehand, of what I'm going to have to do. I do have a series of poses in my head, and I just sort of like go with it, if the model's doing something that I didn't imagine and I like it, then I'll go with that. If the model's doing something I don't like, then I'll kind of fall back on my poses I have in my head. So.
I think as well that one of the things that you mentioned earlier on, and it's something that we use a lot here, when you're referring to the mood boards, but you also mentioned quite early on about Pinterest and things like that. It's like these
Yeah.
things are so handy. You can have them on your phones, you can have them on your iPads, so it's, especially for somebody starting out, sometimes it's like, oh my God, what do I do next? Because, the model might not have anything for you when you build in portfolio. So having that reference material on your phone or your iPad or a tablet or something on site, it's well, you do it all the time. Before a big shoot, and we've done exactly what you said. It's having that preparation and that planning. So use these tools that are out there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Okay, let's see where I'm at. Okay, so yeah, a couple of these are quick, and I like these. So you talked about the fact that you use a retoucher, which is quite common in the fashion / editorial commercial industry. Is it something because you just time-wise you don't want to do yourself, or is it a skill that you want somebody else to do? Is the photography and the lighting your thing, or is it just a time thing, Clay? Or
It's a little bit of both. I used to retouch, coming from a graphic design and sort of background when I first started photography, I loved doing sort of the retouching. I loved doing all the post-processing sort of stuff with compositing and all that. Like that was my world. But it kind of came down to where I started shooting so much that the latter, like all that retouching sort of stuff just kind of fell by the wayside. And I didn't really like keep up with it, and then it came down to something where I was shooting so much, and then I wasn't retouching as much because it just takes practice. I mean, just like anything else, if you don't continually retouch or you don't continually shoot, you'll never get better or push yourself outside your comfort zone. So I just wasn't, I didn't feel like I was up to par with where I needed to be and where my actual work was on the photography side. So that's when I brought in Jordan to start retouching my work. And it's just alleviated so much as far as time. So I think that it's a lot of both. I definitely 100% do not have the time to retouch all my images now. I retouch, you know, I pretty much don't retouch any image ever anymore. I think that either my assistant does or Jordan does. I do color grade my images now, and I do put the final touches on it, but I haven't retouched an image in probably over 2 years. So it's been a while. And so, you know, just like I said, I would, if I was asked to retouch a fashion editorial, I really wouldn't know. I wouldn't feel like it would be good enough, you know, so.
So I think you kind of just answered this, but it came in, so I thought, you know, I'm going to answer anyway. Do you, or I think you've, I don't know why I should, and I'm going to ask it. Do you find it hard handing your images to a retoucher? But I guess you've built a relationship with somebody very, very special to you, as in work-wise. You know, it's somebody that suits you, suits your work. That's also important.
It's a team. You know, it's just like working with a coach, or you know, working with you know, anybody in football or whatever, you know, or basketball, or you know, you have a team of people that you trust, and so I trust my retoucher 100% to deliver me what I need. And if he doesn't, then we talk about it. You know, we're like, how can we do this better? Because we're just it's a team effort. Because you know, he's in it to retouch, so he want to make sure, you know, he wants to make sure that his stuff looks good. You know, obviously. So yeah, it's a trust, just definitely a trust partnership that we have, and yeah, it's a great relationship.
Brilliant. We were asked this a few times actually, Clay, because you mentioned obviously that it goes to Jordan and then it comes back to you for a color grade, and we've just been asked a few times now, what do you mean by the color grade?
So color grade is, you know, a specific, just trying to think of the word to put this in, but it's a specific color, it's a specific look. You know, you have your raw image, and then you have the final image, and what Jordan sends to me is a color corrected image. Now it's sort of my job to take it into the world of creative, and that might be putting blues and putting blues in the sky, or putting warmth in the skin, or cooling it down, or making it warm or feel hot, because it's all a feeling. Like color grading is definitely a feeling, and so that's sort of where I take it to where Jordan delivers it me retouched, color corrected, and then I take it into sort of the creative space of color. And so it's a very important part of what we do.
I think it's quite distinctive in the time, you know, that we've been talking, and obviously I knew of your work before we talked, but I obviously saw more of it after we started talking. I think you do have a very distinctive, you know, style in your work, and you can see that use of colour without a doubt, and I think it really does stand out. And I think, you know, guys, obviously you've got the links there, so I know Clay's shown you a few images tonight, but if you go and have a look at his website and his portfolio and stuff, you'll definitely see, I think it'll be clearer to them as well, you know, when they go and have a look at that. I felt this right away. I think colour is used a lot in your work, and really, really strong. Which is really,
yeah, it definitely could be a method to defining a style. You know, if you look at, for example, Annie Leibovitz, you know, or her work, like everything, she usually leans towards that very cool colors, like very blues, the cool colors, and so it is a way to define a style for sure. So color is a very important part of what we do.
Brilliant. So we've got a few kit questions. Obviously, we've seen some behind-the-scenes images. Do you prefer the parabolics over the octas or the regular square softboxes?
Yeah, absolutely. I prefer sort of the reflective umbrellas. So the light actually is popping into the umbrella rather than out. It's popping into the umbrella and bouncing off the inside of the umbrella and then going through a outer diffusion. And the reason why I like that is because it eliminates the hot spot that a lot of octaboxes can have. So octaboxes, you know, the light is pointed towards the subject, while the umbrellas that I use are pointed away. So it's a very soft version of light that I just absolutely love. And I really, every time I put up a soft box or put up a big octabox, I just don't like the look. And And so I always fall back on the umbrellas. And so I have a barrage of umbrellas. I have so many umbrellas, and they're, you know, constantly breaking and whatnot. But I love using umbrellas over, or parabolic umbrellas over any sort of softbox or octabox.
Brilliant. I know you mentioned it earlier. Somebody just asked again. You mentioned the type of server that you use. What type of server was it, Clay?
It's a Synology server, and I have the 8-bay version, so it can handle up to 24 terabytes of data, I believe, when it's maxed. I think that's how much. But yeah, I have a Synology server that's, and it's amazing. It's just an incredible system to use. You know, I've had the Drobos, I've had all the external drives, and I've done all that. But if you run a really fast, quick network attached storage system or a server, Synology is the way to go for sure.
Brilliant. I thought this was quite an interesting question because obviously you gave us a really in-depth look into, you know, putting the bid together and quoting for the clients. So when you've had the job and obviously you've done it, when do you pay your team?
That is a really good question because a lot of times you have to play the bank. In other words, you know, you have to pay your team out of pocket, and then you get reimbursed those expenses when you're paid the full invoice. But if there is a big shoot, if there is a situation where you are making a lot of money, such as the estimate that I showed or the project that I showed earlier, then a lot of times the client would pay up front, or it's in your terms where the client pays half up front. I think in those terms, we negotiated in the terms to have the client pay half up front, so that I can pay my team on site, or I can pay them accordingly. So.
Brilliant. Okay, so we've had some stuff with regards to, you know, working with magazines and stuff. So we're getting there, Clay. There's only a few questions left, pal.
Sure.
So, okay, I'm just gonna. So when the magazine, are you just providing the magazines with JPEG images only? No, I think you mentioned that, didn't you?
Yeah, normally a magazine doesn't need TIFFs, only if they're trying to use a specific crop, like if they're trying to crop something in. It's very rare. I've had 2 magazines ask for TIFFs in the past, and it's only because they're wanting to crop in a specific way, or they're wanting to format the image a specific way, with permission, of course. You know, and it was sort of a collaborative effort, and so that was the time when I delivered TIFFs to a magazine. But it's always JPEGs, and JPEGs are usually plenty of resolution for print.
Brilliant. This is unfamiliar territory for me, so I'll just ask as I read it. Do you ever use resources like Black Book or agency access when approaching people to advertise?
Absolutely. Yeah, I do. I'm with a consulting company called Wonderful Machine, and I partner with Wonderful Machine on a lot of projects. And so that estimate you saw earlier was sort of a collaborative effort between myself, Craig Oppenheimer at Wonderful Machine, who was negotiating with the client. And I do also work with Agency Access to build lists for mailers as well as newsletters. So yeah, those are both resources that I use heavily and use often.
Brilliant. The level of JPEG, I presume, is the highest quality, right? Full level that you're supplying them.
Yeah, I always export highest quality, and that's exactly the export that I upload to Facebook and social media. You know, I don't think there's any sort of specific resolutions that, you know, gets the best quality on Facebook or social media in general. I think I export full res, and that's what I upload and use for everything.
And that's what the client's getting as well, but yeah.
Exactly, yes.
Perfect. Okay, so is it, this came through, so when approaching and obviously looking for the work and putting yourself in front of these magazines, is it the picture editor, or is there somebody specific that you want to really do your best to sort of get in front of?
Can you repeat that question?
So when you're starting out and you're promoting yourself and you're obviously doing the legwork and you're getting in touch with the magazines, or is there a specific person that you're looking for within the magazine to get your portfolio in front of? Is it the picture editor? And is there somebody specific to target?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. You always want to target creative directors, art directors, or editors, or publishers. I would say that's the big sort of crew there that you definitely want to target, is just to try to, when working with magazines, is definitely the art directors, again, the art directors, creative directors, publishers, or the editors, the editor-in-chief. They're the ones that definitely make the decisions and make the decisions on what sort of, which photographer they're going to use in the next editorial.
Brilliant. Do you prefer bids or estimates?
Estimates.
Excellent. I like those questions.
Yeah.
I thought this was an interesting question, Clay, actually, because you mentioned about social media, and obviously you have a big you have a big following on social media, and obviously in this day and age, social media is key. So this question I thought was interesting. What is your opinion on the new trends of like buying likes and followers, on the likes of social media?
Yeah, I think that's a definitely a fair, good question. Never do it. That's the biggest thing. You always want to build an organic following. The problem with buying likes and buying a lot of that stuff is that it doesn't really truly build organic engagement, meaning that it's a lot of air. It's just a lot of it's nobody that's going to follow you in the future and be a fan, if you will, or be a very a strong follower, So I think that buying likes and buying all that stuff isn't really something that I would recommend at all. Now, that's to say, on Facebook, I think that you can do strategic sponsored ads that work really well if you have something to promote, or you have a product to promote, or you have a project you want to promote, or a blog. I think doing sponsored campaigns can really help on Facebook, but I would never boost posts or anything like that just for engagement or just for likes. It all comes down to content, and maybe that's a different webinar that we can do about social media content. I love talking about social media, but you definitely, it comes down to the content, because these days content is king. It's everything.
Absolutely, and you nailed exactly that. We do so much advice with Facebook and stuff, within our business, and I completely agree with you. We would never buy likes, and we would only use exactly what you just said. We might use advertising to promote a specific offer or promotion, but that's the only way we use. I absolutely agree with you 100% on that. We'll get a few have chipped in, so the last couple of questions, guys, otherwise we'll probably have Clay here all night. Well, it's lunchtime for you, or just after lunchtime for you. It'll be all night here in the UK. How do you put, this is a good question actually, Clay, we get it quite a lot, and you've talked about social media. How can you protect your images on social media, because obviously they can be copied and shared? Would it be interesting to see what your take is on that?
It's like when you put your images out on social media, anyone can take them or use them or whatever. That's just the nature of the beast these days. There's nothing that you could really do about it. Unfortunately, if you do watermark your images, or you do try to protect them somehow, it has a negative effect on your engagement overall. It doesn't look that great. I actually think watermarks are just no professional high caliber photographer is watermarking their images, because they don't need to. And so I think watermarking images can have a negative impact on your whole Instagram, Facebook, social media following. I think it also looks sort of amateur hour, if you will. I think you look less expensive if you're watermarking images. So you just have to it's the nature of the culture we're in. Now, if you do find an image being used in a commercial space, then you can definitely cease and desist and go that route, and it does happen quite often. I've had to do it a few times where people have just taken my images and used them commercially, and I've had to write them cease and desist, and invoice them for the license. And usually it's a totally easy conversation to have, but unfortunately, again, it's just the nature of the society we live in.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, and that's what I thought you'd say. So brilliant. Okay, so it's the very last question I've got here for you, Clay. It's kind of in a similar vein, but it's not to do with social media. just have you ever had an experience where, you know, the clients had the images and they've not paid any ways to get around this? What, you know, I guess money up front, pal, would be the easiest answer, right?
Yeah, you know, most of my projects, I'm not paid up front. The majority, I'd say 80% of them, unless it is a very big job. Most of the time I'm being paid within 30 days. A lot of times when you're working for bigger magazines, like the gig I did for like Forbes or Popular Mechanics, they do 30 days from press date. So you might shoot an image, let's say you shoot an image in April. Well, they might not go to press with that image until July, and then you're being paid 30 days after that. So you don't get paid for 3-4 months sometimes. So it is, editorial can be a pretty hectic and annoying world when it comes to that. But yeah, I don't really, I've never had a specific experience where a client just hasn't paid. I have had one where a model took a long time to get paid, but it was just constant hounding. It was constantly like, hey, you know, like, where are we at? And a lot of times, you know, if you're just nice to them and say, hey, let's work out a payment plan or something like that, they're more likely to pay you. Or you can go the route of hiring an attorney and going that route, and that usually will get you paid very quickly as well. There's different methods, but I've never had one specific experience where it's come to a client just never paying. So
brilliant, Clay.
I guess I'm lucky because of that, you know.
Sneaky question has slipped through, but guys, this is the last question. Otherwise, we will be here all night. So, when you do a location shoot, and you as you mentioned earlier, you take all your gear along. Are you taking your own, or are you hiring it? I think that's the question. Yes, it is.
Yeah, it simply depends on the project. Very rarely do I have to rent equipment because I do own most of my equipment. But I know a lot of photographers, especially in bigger markets, rent tons of equipment because they don't have much storage space to use. Fortunately, here in the middle of the U.S., I have plenty of space to store equipment, and I have a studio where I have all my equipment stored in a secure space. So I do own most of the equipment that I use. The only thing I do rent every now and then is, let's say, a medium format camera or something that is needed for like a big Matthews scrim or something like that. It's case by case basis. It's only per project, and that would be a billable equipment rental. So.
Absolutely brilliant, mate. Absolutely brilliant. So that's the last of the questions, and obviously I've got a few things that I know we're going to just share with the guys that we haven't talked about tonight yet, but I just wanted to thank you straight off, in case I forget, for sharing tonight, because so much information, and you and I have already chatted, and you're happy to spend some more time with us soon, and we're going to feature you in the magazine as well, so